a CIA analyst, writing in 1957, describes a government ordering the complete rewriting of an entire nation's past. He does not call it revision. He does not call it reinterpretation. He does not soften the language. He uses one specific word. He calls it falsified. The nation whose history was falsified is Tartaria. Before I go any further, I want to be precise about something, because this is exactly where most people in this space get it wrong. They find one paragraph. They screenshot it. They post it without context and declare it proof of something vast. I am not going to do that. The context of this document matters, and the context makes what is written inside it significantly worse than the screenshot suggests. So I am going to walk through the whole thing, every page, in order, because you deserve the full picture, not the clip. The document is titled National Cultural Development Under Communism. It opens with a direct quote from a Bolshevik proclamation dated December 7th, 1917. The proclamation was signed by both Lenin and Stalin. It was addressed specifically Muslim peoples across the Russian Empire, Tatars of the Volga and Crimea, Kyrgyz and Sarts of Siberia and Turkestan, Turks and Tatars of Transcaucasia, Chechens and mountain peoples of the Caucasus. The language of the proclamation was explicit. Your beliefs and customs, your national and cultural institutions are forever free and inviolate. Organize your national life in complete freedom. This is your right. That was the promise made in writing and signed at the highest level of the new Soviet government. The remaining 13 pages of the CIA document are a meticulous accounting of how every single syllable of that promise was systematically broken. Mosques destroyed, languages corrupted or outright suppressed, Muslim literary works banned unless they contained praise for Russia and Russians. Folk epics that had survived for centuries were reclassified. The Kazakh epic Koblanda Batyr, once celebrated as a monument of national literature, was redefined by Soviet authorities as what they called low poetry, extolling violence and brigandage. An entire culture's literary heritage made illegal unless it could be made to serve Russian imperial interests. This is not conspiracy. This is documented by the CIA in 1957. Then the document reaches page 9, August 9th, 1944. While the world's attention was consumed by the Allied advance through France, and while newspapers were running maps of Normandy and Patton's march eastward, the Central Committee of the Communist Party in Moscow was issuing a very different kind of order. Not a military directive, a historical one. It was sent to the Tatar Provincial Committee. The instruction was clear: proceed to a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria. Liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of a nationalistic character committed by individual writers and historians. The CIA analyst writes what follows, without hesitation and without diplomatic softening. He does not hedge. He does not qualify. He writes, in other words, Tatar history was to be rewritten. Let us be frank. It was to be falsified in order to eliminate references to great Russian aggressions and to hide the facts of the real course of Tatar-Russian relations. And then comes the line that other people covering this story always cut off. The analyst continues directly. And this was no isolated case. In every Muslim area within the USSR, historians have rewritten history on orders of the Communist Party. The goal was to distort the facts so that Russians appear always in a good light. One final line. Histories which present the facts truthfully have been withdrawn and destroyed. Withdrawn and destroyed. Not archived, not reclassified, not moved to a different shelf in a restricted library. Destroyed. That word was chosen deliberately by a CIA analyst in 1957, and it sat behind a classification stamp for 42 years. Now, I want to be careful here, because precision matters, and I refuse to overstate what this document does and does not prove. Fact-checkers have correctly noted that this document does not prove the existence of a Tartarian empire as described in the more speculative corners of the Internet. They are right. It does not. But here is exactly what it does prove. Or in the CIA's own language, a government issued a directive ordering the history of a specific territory to be rewritten. A CIA analyst documented that directive and used the word falsified to describe what was ordered. Histories that told the truth were physically destroyed, and the CIA's own report documenting all of this was classified for over 4 decades. The question is not whether this proves everything people claim online. The question is simpler and more uncomfortable. What was so dangerous about the history of this territory that it required active falsification in the first place? What exactly needed to disappear? So what was Tartaria? Not the Internet version, not the theories, the primary source version, the version that existed 2 full centuries before the Internet was ever conceived, the Encyclopedia Britannica, not a modern edition, the very first edition ever published. Edinburgh, 1771. 3 volumes. Volume 3, page 887. The entry reads as follows. Tartary, a vast country in the northern parts of Asia, bounded by Siberia on the north and west. This is called Great Tartary. The Britannica then proceeds to list specific subdivisions, the Tartars of Astrakhan, Circassia, and Dagestan. The Kalmuk Tartars, positioned between Siberia and the Caspian Sea. The Uzbek Tartars and Moguls north of Persia and India. Those of Tibet to the northwest of China. And crucially, the Britannica identifies distinct political entities within this territory, each with named capitals. Moscow Tartary with its capital in Tobolsk. Chinese Tartary bordering China. Independent Tartary with its capital in Samarkand. These are not vague geographic labels for unexplored wilderness. These are territories with identified capitals and described forms of governance. And Moscow Tartary, according to the first encyclopedia ever published in the English language, it was described as the largest country in the world. Today, if you type Tartaria into any search engine, the top results will tell you it never existed, that it was merely a cartographic convenience, a catch-all label that European map makers applied to lands they did not understand. But you do not issue a directive from the Central Committee of the Communist Party ordering the scientific revision and falsification of a cartographic convenience. You do not classify the CIA report documenting that order for 42 years if the territory was simply empty steppe. Empty steppe does not require falsification. Something about this history was worth the sustained and deliberate effort of erasure across not one government, but 2 centuries and multiple regimes. And to understand why, you need to look at what happened just 2 years after the Britannica published that entry. September 1773. A Don Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev raises an army along the Yaik River. He was born around 1742 in a village called Zimoveyskaya. He had fought in the 7 Years' War and the Russo-Turkish War. Before deserting the Imperial Russian Army, he was arrested, he escaped, he was arrested again, he escaped again. He spent years moving through the communities of Cossacks and Old Believers along the southern frontier of the empire, listening, learning their grievances, absorbing the weight of what ordinary people felt under Catherine's rule. And then he made the claim that would nearly bring the entire Russian Empire to its knees. He declared himself to be Tsar Peter III, Catherine the Great's murdered husband, risen and returned to reclaim the throne that had been taken from him. What followed was not a peasant riot. It was not a local disturbance. Pugachev assembled forces that grew to over 100,000 fighters, Yaik Cossacks, Tatars, Bashkirs, the serfs, factory workers, Old Believers, anyone with a reason to resist Catherine's rule. He did not simply gather a mob. He established a war college modeled on Catherine's own military structure. He built intelligence networks of messengers and couriers. He recruited local priests and mullahs to write and distribute royal decrees in both Russian and Tatar. He captured the city of Kazan and burned it to the ground. He besieged the administrative capital of Orenburg for 6 full months. At his peak, he threatened Moscow itself. Catherine was forced to pull combat troops from her ongoing war against the Ottoman Empire just to fight him. His territory stretched from the Volga to the Urals. Look at a map from 1771. That is the exact territory the Britannica labeled Tartary. Catherine initially treated him as a nuisance. She placed a bounty of 500 rubles on his head, the kind of price you put on a petty criminal, not a military commander. Within a year, all that bounty exceeded 28,000 rubles. By the summer of 1774, the largest peasant revolt in Russian history was burning across the largest territory described by the world's leading encyclopedia. In August 1774, his forces were finally crushed near Tsaritsyn. 10,000 rebels killed or captured. In September, his own Cossacks betrayed him and delivered him to the imperial army in chains. He was transported to Moscow in an iron cage, interrogated for a month, sentenced on January 10, 1775. Yemelyan Pugachev was beheaded and quartered in Bolotnaya Square before a public crowd. His remains were displayed across the city and then burned, but Catherine did not stop there. And this is the moment where the story stops being about a rebellion and becomes something else entirely. Because Catherine did not just execute Pugachev. She attempted to make him and everything he represented cease to exist on the surface of the earth. His house was burned to the ground. His village, Zimoveyskaya, was renamed Potemkinskaya. The river where the rebellion had started, the Yaik River, was renamed. You have heard of the Ural River. You have never heard its original name because Catherine removed it from every map, every document, and every official correspondence. The Yaik Cossacks became the Ural Cossacks. The city of Yaitsky Gorodok became Uralsk. Even Pugachev's surviving family members were forced to abandon their own surname entirely. They were reassigned a different name. They became the Simonov family. The bloodline itself was renamed. The decree authorizing all of this is dated January 13th, 1775, and it states its purpose in language so direct it reads less like a legal instrument and more like a confession written in plain sight. The stated reason for renaming a river, a city, a village, and an entire people was recorded in the decree with these words: complete oblivion, not justice, not deterrence, not the suppression of rebellion, complete oblivion. Akashi wrote her intention into the legal record. You rename a river to achieve oblivion. You burn a house to prevent memory. You force a family to abandon their name so that even bloodlines forget what they carried. That is not how empires respond to defeated criminals. That is how empires erase countries. I sat with this research for 3 full weeks before I could write a single sentence of this script, not because the facts were difficult to locate. Every detail described in this video is mainstream documented history. Pugachev appears in every serious Russian history textbook. Catherine's renaming campaign is recorded in Britannica, in academic journals, in the Russian state archives. None of this is secret among historians. What kept me returning to these notes in silence was the weight of what all of it means when you place it side by side instead of reading each piece in isolation. Place Catherine's decree of 1775 next to the Soviet directive of 1944. Place both of them next to the CIA report of 1957. Because the pattern does not stop with Catherine, it repeats for 200 years against the same territory using recognizably similar methods. After Catherine's campaign, the territory's history kept resurfacing. Historians kept writing about it. National heroes kept being celebrated by the peoples who lived there and whose grandfathers had fought there. In 1837, a Kazakh sultan named Kenisari Kasimov launched a decade-long uprising against Russian territorial expansion. He was descended from the line of Genghis Khan. He was the last Khan of the Kazakhs. He fought for 10 years across terrain that appears on historical maps as Tartary. He was killed in 1847. His people never forgot him. In 1943, a history of the Kazakh SSR was published that included Kenisari among national heroes. 2 years later, a Bolshevik journal attacked the book for glorifying Kazakh military traditions and resistance to Russia. Then, in 1947, a historian named Baysenby Bekmekhanov, the first Kazakh ever to earn a doctoral degree in history, published his work which praised Kenisari's uprising. He received severe warnings from the Communist Party's Central Committee. By December 1950, Pravda itself published an article reclassifying Kenisari's 10-year liberation struggle as, and I am quoting the Soviet characterization, a reactionary feudal movement. Bekmekhanov was required to rewrite his own doctoral conclusions. He changed what his own research showed. He reversed his own argument under party pressure, not because the evidence changed, because he was told to. A trained historian, working from primary sources, rewrote his own findings to say the opposite of what his evidence demonstrated. Think carefully about what that means for how history reaches you. And Kenisari was not the only case. Imam Shamil, the legendary military and spiritual leader who led 25 years of Caucasian resistance against Russian imperial expansion, received identical treatment. The Great Soviet Encyclopedia reversed its own previous characterization of his movement. What one edition had described as a struggle for national liberation. A subsequent edition relabeled as a fight for backwardness, oppression, and darkness. All museums across the borderland territories were purged, art objects were confiscated, dozens of folk epics were officially designated as reactionary and removed from circulation, all of it documented by the same CIA analyst in 1957, all of it sealed behind a classification stamp until 1999. You can draw a single continuous line through 200 years of this. 1771. The Britannica describes Tartary with named subdivisions and identified capitals and calls Moscow Tartary, the largest country in the world. 1773. The largest armed revolt in Russian history erupts across that exact territory. 1775. Catherine renames the river, burns the village, issues the decree of complete oblivion. 1776. 1 year later, the United States of America declares independence. 1837 to 1847. Canisary's rebellion across the same lands. 1944. Moscow issues a directive ordering the scientific revision and falsification of Tatar history. 1957. The CIA documents the falsification and classifies its own report. 1999. The report is finally released to the public reading room. At every point on that 200-year timeline, the same territory is the target. And at every point on that timeline, someone in power is actively rewriting what happened there. Every claim in this video is independently verifiable before this video ends. The CIA document is available in their public reading room at the link in the description. The 1771 Britannica is fully scanned and available through the Internet Archive, hosted by the National Library of Scotland. Pugachev's rebellion is documented in chapters of every major encyclopedia covering Russian history. Catherine's renaming decrees are preserved in the Russian state archives. The Bekmekhanov case is covered in published academic journals and in Foreign Affairs magazine. You do not need to take my word for any of this. You can check every single source before this video reaches its final minute. That is what separates this from speculation. These are not my documents. They are not my words. They belong to the people who carried out the decisions described inside them, written by the hands that signed the orders, preserved in the archives of the institutions that executed them. A CIA analyst in 1957 chose the word falsified. That an empress in 1775 wrote complete oblivion directly into law. An encyclopedia published in 1771 described the largest country in the world, and today that country does not appear on any map, in any classroom, in any standard curriculum, anywhere on Earth. The river Catherine renamed still flows under the name she gave it. The territory the Britannica described still exists under the names other empires assigned to it. The histories that were withdrawn and destroyed are still gone. No copies returned, no replacements written, and the most unsettling part of this story is not what was hidden. It is that every step of the hiding was documented. The orders were written down. The falsification was recorded. The CIA put it in a report. And then the report was classified. And they counted on one thing above all else. They counted on the absolute certainty that you would never bother to look.